Yep. Welcome to our webinar. Today it's about electric cars. We're going to discuss why your next car should be electric. And my name is Noel Smith, and I am a long-time electric car driver, more than 10 years now. And tonight with me, I have Peter Pilganisi, who also has a large experience in electric vehicles, both a motorcycle and a car. And I guess I have just a question for the audience before we jump into our slides. If you could post into the chat the year, and we're going to see who gets closest to the year that the first electric car was released. Yeah, so just take a guess at what year you think the first electric car was put out. Yeah, if you could throw that into the chat. We'll just take a minute to see what the poll says, and then go on to our presentation. What year was the first electric car released? That's a pretty good guess. All right. Any more guesses? We got 1914, 1992, so that's a wide range. Anyone else venture a guess? 1910, enjoy, okay. Everyone's Googling frantically right now. No Googling. Okay, all right, we have a couple answers, and yeah, we'll go ahead and present that result. So 1832 was in fact the first electric carriage that had limited range, was useful for local driving, but it was really easy to drive. It started right up, but as opposed to the 1910 Model T, which solved the range issue, but it was kind of difficult to start. I think they had to crank them, and yeah, changing gears was challenging, but yeah, it became the dominant form of transportation in the world. So yeah, anyway, just a little trivia for you there. So transportation so let's talk about like why it's important. You know, transportation is a significant contributor to overall greenhouse gas emissions, and also contributes significantly to other heart and lung related diseases through the emissions of the vehicles. In 2020, the transportation sector accounted for 27% of the overall U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And of that, over 83% was from trucks and cars. So going electric is a big deal for the environment. And yes, we know that the grid is not yet clean, but it's going in that direction every year. And electric cars are much more efficient than a comparable gasoline car. I purchased my electric car in 2012 for this reason. I knew this transition was required to provide a sustainable planet for future generations, and by supporting this technology, you know, I was supporting it to get to the point where it is now. And you know, I feel like every part matters, every car purchase matters. So important for us to do this. So high gas prices are not fun. I realize that. I've not purchased gas for my car for over 10 years, and I generally don't know what the price of gas is, which is kind of nice, except when it's the news of the day. But I get no joy out of seeing people suffer because of the volatility of oil prices. The U.S. is the largest oil producer in the world and produces more than we consume. So how is it that the oil prices here go up when there's a disruption in the global supply? Well, first of all, oil is not the same. Not oil is the same, and refining methods vary, and U.S. refineries are not aligned to the oil that's produced in the country. So we send some out and we bring some in, but the net is we send more out than we bring in. And yes, we were importing Russian oil before they invaded Ukraine. And regardless of how much oil we produce, oil is a global commodity, which means any disruption to the free flow of oil will disrupt the price regardless of how much we were able to produce locally. And you can also see in the chart that the OPEC cartel controls the large majority of oil reserves. And combined with Russia, it's about 85% of total oil reserves are controlled by that cartel. So energy security is not actually possible if we are reliant on oil. Policymakers that tell you otherwise are just fibbing to you. So there's two types of hybrid vehicles. There's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, the PHEV, as we call it, and there's a couple of models out for this. And these are like transition vehicles, but the plug-in Prius Prime and even the RAV4 Prime and the Hyundai Iconic, they're both plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And what they have is two drivetrains. They have an electric drivetrain and they have a gasoline drivetrain. And the vehicles, when the battery goes down, it can run the gasoline engine and move the car with that engine. You know, there's complexities with that. So you have two drivetrains and more parts and more maintenance and things like that. And then there's another kind, which is called the extended range EV, the EREVs. The Chevy Volt is one of those, and the BMW i3, I think, is one of those. But so the way that they work is the gasoline portion runs a generator, which recharges the battery. So it's one drivetrain. It's electric, so it's all electric drive, but it can generate its own electricity using gasoline and a generator. These have all been discontinued that I'm aware of. I don't know that there's any EREVs that are on the marketplace today. The Volt and the i3 were both retired by their manufacturers, and so that does support that. These are transition vehicles. They weren't long-term solutions, and the car companies have pivoted to retire those. So all electric vehicles, also known as battery electric vehicles, or just EVs as we call them, don't rely on gasoline at all. And the early models of these were the Chevy Bolt, the Tesla, all the models, the Nissan Leaf. But now just about every car maker in the world is moving or has a version of an EV. And in fact, several manufacturers have made statements that they will stop making gasoline vehicles, and they put a date out for when that would happen. So they're moving their entire platforms over to electric. So yeah, the performance, the range, it's fine for most commutes. We have talked a little bit about that in a little bit. Long trips, you do have to think differently about and do a little planning maybe. And there is some range considerations when it gets cold out. Oh, okay, I'm cutting in and out. Sorry about that. Yeah, if you can ping me if my sound isn't great, I'll make sure I have my boom to my mouth. So why buy an electric vehicle? So there's lower lifetime costs, which is true now. The fuel and maintenance is very competitive. The acceleration is wonderful. It's a super fun drive. They're very quiet to drive, very stable, and safe. And we'll talk about that as well. There's basically, for my daily driving, like the way I use the vehicle on a normal, coming home every night basis, there's actually zero fuel time because you don't stop the fuel. You plug in when you get home. So while you're eating dinner or sleeping, your vehicle is recharging. So there's no stops. There are very good subsidies that exist for vehicles and some perks for some locales, and there's certainly the environmental benefits. But there are some cons. There is a higher initial cost, but no, not really anymore. The costs have come down significantly, and they're price competitive with gasoline vehicles, a comparable gasoline vehicle, or if they're not, they'll be very, very soon. It does take longer to fuel up when you're on a long trip, when you're not charging at home. So that's something you plan for. There are some charging infrastructure challenges that are still out there. So the model selection is it's more limited than gasoline, but it's growing dramatically. In fact, I think there's over 100 models that you could choose from now from the manufacturers. And yeah, there's, for city to city driving, there's the range challenge, which, we'll talk about as well. So some myths that are out there, some common myths: that plug-in electric vehicle can only support short trips and not daily commutes. In fact, most EVs have a range of over 200 and many over 300 miles. And the average commute is typically less than 40 miles round trip. So for most users, drivers, the EV will have plenty of range for your daily driving. Another myth is the electric vehicles will make your energy bill go way up, when in fact the opposite is true. You will have a higher electric bill, but you won't have a gas bill. So your savings are more than offset by not buying gas anymore. And the price of electricity to run a vehicle on a mile per mile basis, it generally runs. It's like fixing the price of gasoline at $1, and it doesn't change, doesn't fluctuate like it does in the. So that's kind of a comparable number. That's just kind of a comparison I use. Another myth is that plug-in electric vehicles aren't clean; they run off dirty power plants. Well, you can source renewable energy. It is available. You can get solar panels as well, like some have done. But even still, if you're using the grid, it's still the emissions. When you take the account for the emissions of the power plant, the EV still contributes significantly less greenhouse gases than traditional vehicles, and also less pollutants in the air. The other myth that we have here is electric vehicles are far more expensive than the average car. In fact, the 5-year costs are comparable, if not lower, for EVs. The lifetime cost is certainly lower for EVs when you look at the total cost of ownership for the car. So yeah, there's some of the myths and some myth busting. The performance: electric cars are wonderful to drive. Instant torque, very quick acceleration. There are no gears, which results in a very smooth and quiet ride. Equal weight distribution is great, and it's got a low center of gravity. So typically the batteries in the bottom, and there's no engine. There's either there's a motor that'll sit on the axle, and so the weight distribution and low center of gravity gives a very stable ride for the vehicles. They typically have electronic controls. They have what's called regenerative braking, which is another efficiency mode. So when you're stopping the vehicle, I call it one pedal driving. I typically use, I barely use my brake, and we'll talk about maintenance costs in a minute as well, because the car slows itself down by creating electricity. It converts the motion of the vehicle into electricity, which slows the vehicle and creates energy. But they are generally heavier. The batteries are heavy. So for a comparable electric vehicle versus gas, they're probably a couple 100 pounds heavier overall. This is what the sticker will look like, just to give you a little bit of tip on this. They do show the annual cost of the fuel for the vehicles, and you can see on the left, that's an electric car window sticker. On the right is a comparable gas car. They give you the annual fuel cost, which is useful information. And just the fuel economy is another one that you want to look at for this vehicle. This one has a 116 miles per gallon equivalent. And what that means is for the energy used and the miles traveled, they convert the energy into gallons of gasoline. So for the energy that's in 1 gallon of gasoline, this vehicle can go 116 miles versus the comparable gasoline car goes 26 miles for that same amount of energy that's in 1 gallon of gasoline. So that's what that means. Okay. And the chart on maintenance, there is maintenance for an electric vehicle, just like any vehicle. You have tires, and tires wear out, but there's no oil change. There's no transmission, so there's no transmission fluid. So whatever you were used to paying for that will go away. Coolant, there on the Leaf, there's a coolant that needs to get serviced at 125,000 miles. The Camry's every 30,000, so you can see there's some savings in coolant changes. There are no spark plugs in an electric car. In a gas, you would. The brakes I put there, you do need to make sure you have brake pads checked, but I just had my first set of brake pads replaced at 115,000 miles on my car. So I call it like half as much, maybe even a third as much for the brakes. There's no timing belt, and then the other items are wear and tear that you have. So you can see that there's quite a bit of savings on maintenance. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter to talk about charging technology.
So one of the transition issues are how are you going to charge, where are you going to charge? And so one of the first things you need to learn is, well, there are different levels of charging that are available. And you have to do a little bit of research to understand what's best for you. So level 1 is a charger that will plug into an ordinary 120 volt outlet at home, but it will take quite a long time to fully charge a typical fully electric car. It's actually quite adequate if you don't have a daily commute or if you're driving a plug-in hybrid. If you do a lot of, if you are doing a daily commute and a significant amount of miles, you will need a level 2 charge, and that is going to use a 240 volt outlet, which is like a dryer outlet. So where to charge is easiest if you're in a big home with a roomy garage, and maybe the garage has a washer and dryer with a big outlet, 220 volt outlet for the dryer, right? Easy situation, which is to say you could just plug in. And assuming that you have either a charger, a 240 volt charger arrangement supplied with the vehicle, or you buy a level 2 charger. So again, a little bit of research. I think increasingly manufacturers are going to be providing level 2 or combination 1-2 chargers. So Chevrolet Bolt is a good example. I actually drive a 2019 Bolt. I started charging it level 1 and an outlet. I had a 240 volt outlet installed, and so I bought a very inexpensive charger that plugs into it. It's actually only a 16 amp charger, but that's enough to charge overnight, which met my needs at any rate. But the level 2 chargers go up to 40 amps and perhaps even above. Now, so Bolt is now providing, they provided me with a 110 volt level 1. They now provide a combination 1-2 with the car, and they're actually also offering to install a 240 volt outlet for you with the purchase of a new car. So things are changing. I think the manufacturers are recognizing that, you know, people have needs in terms of the transition to electric vehicles. Now, when you're charging on the road, you are looking at level 3 or level 4 for something like the Chevy Bolt, known as DC fast charging. And that goes very, very fast. It's limited only by the vehicle. So when I bought my vehicle, for example, the DC fast charge receptacle was actually an option. Now it's standard. And Tesla, it's standard to get fast charging. So you do want to just do your research on these questions of how to charge, where to charge. But what this means is when you're driving on the road, you're just a little bit cognizant of the fact that where you're going to stop and how long is it going to take. And so you want to plan your brakes for that purpose. And I've driven extensively around at least the eastern United States, as far as Maine and Ohio. So, and we'll show you how you figure that out. Next slide, please. So the where is one thing to remember is, for the most part, most people are going to be charging at home. They're going to be charging overnight. And then in metropolitan areas, in cities, for example, maybe you have the biggest challenge. So if you don't have access at your home to charging, then you're charging at a public charging facility. But for the most part, people are charging at home. Sometimes you can charge at work. And then we'll talk about charging elsewhere. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I started out with level 1. Most people are now charging at home with level 2. So the cost is nothing for a level 1. If you already have an accessible 230 volt outlet and the manufacturer provides you with a charger, the cost for level 2 is nothing. They are as inexpensive as 200 for my lower amperage level 2, 500, 600 more typical for the higher amperage units. They go pretty high for workplace charging and public charging level 2, where they're networked. And we'll talk about that with anyone who has an interest in workplace charging offline. Next slide. So what do you do when you're driving, when you know that there's a gas station almost anywhere you're going to drive and you'll pass it and you don't really have to worry about it? Well, the answer is there's an app for that. So the all charging app, the widest used, is PlugShare. There are others. Tesla has its app and Chevy has its app. I like to use PlugShare. I think it's most functional for a Chevy user. And you can filter out. So the faster charging level 3 and higher DC fast charge for my car are in this orange, and green are level 2. And you could filter out the level 2, which I do when I go on a trip. And so you could see exactly where, and it maps it, how far how long is it going to take? And then you could actually, convert it to whatever mapping system you have on your phone or in your car to get you there. Next slide. So we talked about cost. And, when we first started doing this workshop several years ago, we said, someday it's going to be cheaper to buy an electric car. That day has come. So this data is actually off of the federal AFDC alternative fuel website, the Department of Energy. And so you could actually compare cars, multiple cars, and look at the cost of ownership on this website, which is really useful. The conventional wisdom, an electric car costs more on the front end. In most cases, yes, a little bit more than the cheapest dirt cheap vehicle that you can buy. But for the most part, when you look at total cost of ownership over, whether you look at 5 years, which is something that, KBB or Edmunds will put on their website, what's the 5-year cost of ownership, or long term. So once you get past a certain point, the payback just keeps going. So if you're a person that keeps your car for 10 years, you're really, you're getting a lot of payback for buying an electric car. Okay, next slide. So you can look at side-by-side comparisons. So this is another Department of Energy website, fueleconomy.gov. You see at the bottom, there is this, the URL. And basically you can pick and choose what you want to compare. So we've done some side-by-sides, and, looking at the amount you save with regard to energy, obviously the electric cars are hands down better. And you could compare, regular vehicles to plug-in hybrids to electric vehicles, or electric vehicles side by side. And what you'll notice is the equivalent MPG in most of these units is, several fold better across the board. Okay, next slide. So very important to know is, are you going to be eligible for tax credits? So under the new IRA legislation, they sort of changed the landscape a little bit. So before, they had $7,500 rebates with certain eligibility criteria. Now it is different. Okay, so they're prioritizing certain things. Number one, if you want to buy $100,000 car, sorry, you're not eligible for a tax credit. So it's capped at 55,000 for most vehicles. I think larger capacity vehicles go up. And they now have to be assembled in North America. And so, also income cap. So adjusted gross income on your tax return. So married filing jointly, the cap is 300,000, and it changes depending on your status. So you really need to look it up. And the good news is it's easy to look up on this website. You can see what vehicles are eligible. You can actually query whether you're eligible based on your income. One of the things that you have to be aware of is, this is also available for used cars, by the way, up to $4,000 on a once used car. But however, you have to be careful because it is maximum purchase price, $25,000, and it has to be at least 2 years old. And then there are lower income caps. So the idea here is to make it an easier point of entry for low and moderate income families. Okay, next slide. And do not forget Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania changed its tax rebate significantly. And so now it is also income capped. But it's a nice rebate dollar wise, and it's available for new or once pre-owned vehicle or a demo vehicle. And so you can get $2,000 if you're under 400% of the federal poverty line, which is shown here. So that's relatively generous. Some people may not qualify. And then if you're below 200% of the federal poverty criteria, you actually qualify for a $3,000 rebate. So potentially, lowering the cost of, entry for a lower income person, they might qualify for a $3,000 Pennsylvania rebate and a $4,000 federal rebate. So plug-in hybrid under the state system also qualifies for some, and electric motorcycle like mine qualifies for some. And and years ago when I bought my electric motorcycle, I did get a check from the state. And when I bought my Chevy Bolt, I did get a $7,500 tax credit. Okay, next slide. So that is sort of the landscape of electric vehicles and the transition. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about range anxiety. That's one of the things that a lot of people have and are concerned about. And I think you can get over it once you look at PlugShare and you plug in your situation and you try to map a trip, which is much like mapping it on your phone. You'll see that there are ample opportunities to charge. The best network is Tesla. We were just discussing this before the workshop, that Tesla may be converting access for a good number of their charging stations to allow non-Tesla vehicles to charge there. That would be nice. Because they really have an excellent charging network. And I usually tell people who have severe range anxiety and are concerned about the network, and they look at, there are some charging deserts out there. For example, I went to Maine, no problem. Connecticut, no problem. Ohio, no problem. I once was planning a business trip to Binghamton, New York. Guess what I saw? I saw what you would say is a charging desert. So at that point in time, north of Allentown, Pennsylvania, there was zilch. Okay. A lot of those charging deserts hopefully will be eliminated within the next few years. If you drive a Tesla, you're going to see a lot better landscape with regard to much, much more limited areas that there is insufficient charging, and really all of the interstate highway network is adequately covered. So that's it. I will make a pitch. We do videos on a bunch of topics. We just did cold weather heat pumps. We do solar and composting, and you'll find them all. You'll find information about Haverford EAC on Facebook, and you'll find our videos. If you just search for YouTube Haverford EAC, you'll find our videos channel. So with that, I guess we'll take questions. If Joy, do you want to moderate questions?
I also allow folks to take themselves off mute. If you'd like to voice your question, too, you can put it into the chat, or you could come off mute and ask your question directly.
So jump right in, the water's fine. We could talk a little bit about situations that we've run into. I guess, one of the adaptations for long trips is instead of, just a quick bathroom break, now I'm looking to organize my trip around, hey, I'm going to stop for lunch and sit down for a half hour, 45 minutes and charge. So that's the kind of thing that you want to think about if you do a lot of long distance travel. Is, yeah, it does change the approach. And my wife loves it because she is a stopper. She wants to take it easy. She wants to take a break and stretch her legs. And I used to be in a big hurry, and I've mellowed out a little bit. I guess, Noel, you could speak to the question of, I think Tesla really has the fastest charging times, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in my experience, the Tesla charging network, there's a couple. I've been driving it for a while, so some of the older ones I would get, typically about 250-ish miles per hour of range added, which is very fast. But the faster ones today, they've actually doubled them. I've seen in my newer car, my wife's car, up to 500 miles an hour, speed going in. And so typically when it's that fast, you stop and you maybe hit the restroom and come back, and it's ready to go. You just don't need to charge anymore. And the other thing about charging is you don't charge to full, you charge to your next destination. So if you have another 50 miles to go, and you make sure that you've got 70 or 80 miles range or more, to get there, you don't fill it up, because that's just not useful. You would, if your home's 50 miles away and you have 80, 90 miles of range, you just stop charging and you go home, and then you plug in when you're home. So it's a little bit different paradigm in how you think about
it. Now you should learn, you will learn a little bit. Well, it's kind of like when you get a new, or when you went from a, flip phone to a smartphone, there was a lot to learn, right? So there's a little bit to learn. And, for example, you learn a little bit about charging batteries, battery life. Everyone always asks, well, the battery is going to really last. Well, I've been driving a Prius with the same type of batteries for 14 years. and there's, still life in the old Prius yet. And so practically speaking, they'll all give, I think, a 10-year warranty on the powertrain, quote unquote, the battery pack, basically. But you could expect them to last longer. Now, battery life does wane slowly over time. So your range at 10 years might not be the same as your range at 1 year. How do you maximize your battery life? Well, one of the things, if people bother to read the manual, is if you don't need to charge to 100%, don't charge to 100, don't go down to 0. So the sweet range is like 20 to 80% on most vehicles. Sweet meaning minimal effect on battery life. And so on your average driving, and you're not going, 200-300 miles, you basically just charge 20 to 80, 20 to 90 is really fine. I usually set mine at 90%. But then the cars are very smart in that you can program time of departure to hit whatever percentage you want. So if you're going on a really long trip and you really would rather leave with 100% charge, you tell it what time you're leaving and it will hit that on the dot at that time. The reason for that, by the way, is charging to 100% is not so much in and of itself damaging. It is that the state of charge of batteries change with temperature, with ambient temperature. And so not charging to 100% gives you the safety factor. Charging to 100% at the point of departure means your risk is minimal.
Oh, right there.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, we have a question in the chat, but when you're done there, we'll pull that question up.
AAA provide a charge if necessary. That's a good question. They'll charge your 12-volt battery.
No, I have the answer. They're rolling that service out across the country now. I think it's in like about a dozen or so metro areas, Philadelphia being one of them. So yeah, the AAA service is rolling out what they're calling roadside charging, and it's probably just enough to get you home or to a charger. But yes, it's a service that's being rolled out by AAA. And
yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you all remember the winter closure of I-95 incident probably a couple of years ago now. And right after that, a lot of people asked me, well, you would have been stuck with an electric car. Well, you wouldn't have been more stuck than you would be with a, with an ICE vehicle. If you ran it down to 0, you would be stuck. But, AAA wouldn't come and rescue you necessarily very quickly. But you know exactly where you are on the state of charge on the vehicle, right? So there's no need to run it down to 0 in that situation.
Are there any other questions folks have?
I will say, if nobody's got any questions, I mean, I'll share some of lessons learned with regard to, so with an electric vehicle, the time of year, winter, summer, whether you're blasting the heat matters. Okay, it is going to affect the range, but there's some things that you learn that improve your range even in those situations. So almost everybody knows that there's a little feature on your heating system or air conditioning system in every vehicle, and you could put it on recirc or fresh air, right? So the little trick that I learned is your range on a cold winter day, if you put the heat on recirc, is going to be far, far better than it is if you just try to take all the cold air once through and heat it up, right? Tesla actually is using heat pump technology for its heating, which is interesting and more efficient.
Okay, we've got another question, Peter, so I'm going to read it out and then address it. So the question is, are there any issues with public chargers not being available, all being used, or deliberately being blocked by ICE vehicles?
Yeah, so public charger availability. So using something like PlugShare, the chargers are actually communicating to the app. So, and again, my recent trips to New York, I saw this quite a bit. So I, looked at the availability before I set off on my drive, and actually, in the peak of the afternoon at a mall on the way, at one point, most of the chargers were in use, in which case it's a bit of a crapshoot. A couple of hours later, most of them were available. So yes, you do have to pay attention, and you do need to use the app, but the app will tell you what's available. I did have the experience charging overnight at a hotel, which had a nice fast charger with an ICE vehicle basically parked in the spot. And that is a big problem. And I think it was intentional, obliviousness, not sure what. The better spaces now, the better charging locations now are really brightly painted so that it's obvious to everyone that this is not a normal parking space. And so I think in the past that was not necessarily abundantly clear. And you might have a situation like I had at the hotel where maybe the parking lot was getting full and somebody was lazy and they just wanted to park there. So that is a problem. But I think that problem is slowly going away as there are more and more chargers. I know that Wawa is finally starting to do charging stations at some of their new stores. Other chains like Royal has been doing it for quite a long time in Delaware and Maryland. And Sheetz has been doing it, started doing it really 2-3+ years before. I know, interestingly enough, Walmart stores around the country now have charging stations. And so I recently on a trip back and forth to New York, I didn't want to stop at the mall. I just stopped briefly near an exit on the Jersey Turnpike at a Walmart and charged, and it was great. I guess the one thing to look out for, as you said, was is it out of service? Is it full? Unfortunately, the two stations that were between here and New York on the New Jersey Turnpike, one service stop was actually being completely rebuilt, and then another had the charging station out of service. So that was inconvenient, but essentially within a mile of the New Jersey Turnpike exit, I had a place to charge.
Okay, Jack, this question: when charging at a public spot and you're not present, you're in the diner, can someone unplug yours and charge theirs? No. When you plug your car in, it locks the well, I know in a Tesla and other cars as well, I think it locks the charger into your vehicle, and only you can well, at least in Tesla, you can only take it out when you unlock the vehicle. Peter, is your experience similar?
Yeah, so it's a little different on the Bolt, and you can unplug it. The charging operations try to disincentivize doing that when you're fully when you're at charged, sitting. There may be, let's put it this way, there may be legitimate reasons that someone wants to unplug you. So if you're fully charged and the car is sitting there, but the charging companies will often surcharge you after a small amount of time. Number one, they'll notify you with a text to your cell phone. And number two, there'll be a surcharge. So if you stay longer than 30 minutes plugged in, not charging, they're going to surcharge you. And that's really a courtesy to everyone else to have access to the charging station. I've charged at a university up in Connecticut that had a free level 2 charger. And that is, there's sort of like an etiquette. There's actually a little sign you could put in your window that says, yeah, you can unplug me at X o'clock. And so, the sort of the informal charging networks that were more needed several years ago used to use that sort of etiquette.
Okay, great. Are there any last questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, thanks everyone. And like Peter said earlier, we'll be posting these up to the EAC website as well. And, yeah. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Go out and get an electric car.